Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli wa nusallimu ala rasulihil kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن الكريم والفرقان الحميد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا نحن نزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون وعن عبد الله رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قرأ النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم النجم بمكة فسجد فيها وسجد من كان معه غير شيخ أخذ كفا من حصى أو تراب ورفعه إلى جبعته وقال يكفيني هذا فرأيته بعد ذلك قتل كافرا رواه الشيخان. صدق الله مولانا العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. ربنا يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح ربي زدني علما. اللهم صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, we continue with the topic of Sajdatut Tilaawah, the prostration of the Quran, prostration which is required when a person recites from any of the 14 places in the Holy Quran which has been specified by Nabi alayhi salatu wassalam to make sajda. These sujood were performed by Nabi alayhi salatu wassalam. It were performed by the Sahabas. So much so, the tradition that I have mentioned, Nabi alayhi salatu wassalam recited Surah An-Najm in Makkah. It mentions that he made sajda. All those who were there with him made sajda. But there was one individual who did not make sajda. He took some stone or some dirt, raised it to his head, and he said that is sufficient. And the Rawi says, Hada Abdullah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he says, I see this individual after that he died as a non-believer. Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim narrates this tradition. It shows the importance of these sujood, my dear respected brothers and sisters. We have to take the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seriously. We cannot play games with the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes a person thinks that they are being smart. Sometimes a person thinks that, you know what, I am witty, I am intelligent. So sometimes a person tells us to perform salah, and then a person, ma'adallah, will have a smart aleck remark that comes out. Or the person makes a mock that, okay, well, perform salah. He makes a fast bounce on the ground and comes back up. Well, I perform salah, and you said perform salah. We have to be careful, my dear respected brothers and sisters, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes His deen very seriously. This deen of Allah is not the deen of any man. It is the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this individual, he raised the pebbles or the dirt to his head, and he said that is sufficient. The Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is prostrating. The people who were with him is prostrating also. Why do you not prostrate? And there were munafiqeen amongst the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and there were unbelievers there also. So the point is, my dear respected brothers and sisters, we do not know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take our souls. We beg and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take our souls in a good way. But the point that is just being drawn from this hadith also is that we should not play with the laws of Allah. Do not mock anything of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not joke about rituals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for us as believers. Because after all, these 14 sujood of tilawat of Quran, where does it come from? It comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam informed us of it. So we started to mention, my dear respected brothers and sisters, how to perform sujood tilawat. Say Allahu Akbar without the raising of the hands, and then going down. Allahu Akbar, normal, without raising the hands. We don't have to raise the hands. Allahu Akbar, go down in sajda, read Subhana Rabbi al-A'la 3 times, and then Allahu Akbar, come back up again. We mentioned that this can be done in the sitting posture as well as the standing posture. We will continue today, my dear respected brothers and sisters, with the ruling, while in salah, a person hears the verse of sajda being recited by someone else. He should not make sajda of tilawat in his salah, but after completing his salah, he should make the sajda of tilawah. If he makes it in his salah, it will not be valid. He will have to repeat it out of his salah, and he will be committing a sin, says Maulana Shafari Tanvi rahmatullahi alayhi, for performing of the sajda of tilawat that he hears outside of his salah in salah. We have spoken about Sajdatut tilawat being recited in the salah in itself. A person can do 2 things to fulfill, or 3 things more or less, to fulfill that in his salah. 1, perform the sajda immediately, or after 3 ayats of the Quran. 2, perform ruku with the intention of sajda being fulfilled. Or 3, if the person didn't do the sajda, didn't have the intention of ruku, inshallah it will be fulfilled by the sajda of the salah. However, the person will be sinning because he did not fulfill an act of the sajda of tilawat by means of his intention in ruku or sajda. So now we are speaking about a person is performing salah. Sometimes we may be performing a salah and it may be nafil salah, farz salah as the case may be, but let's make an example with nafil salah. We are in a masjid, we are performing our nafil salah. To try to make it understandable, inshallah, we recite Surah Al-Fatiha, another surah. Then we say Ameen, and at some time, whilst we were going, throughout that salah, we heard the ayat of sajda being recited next to us. We heard the ayat of sajda being recited next to us. And we understood it as an ayat of sajda. Now, we cannot perform this sajda in the salah. This is what has been mentioned. And let's go to a further extent. We mentioned that the tasbihat in salah is sunnah. So let's say that we went in ruku, just to try to make the example easy. We went in ruku and we didn't recite tasbihat. Tasbihat in ruku and sajda are sunnah. So therefore, if we perform salah like that without reciting tasbihat, but actually going into ruku and then going into sajda, our salah will be valid. So let's just say we were not reciting tasbihat. So we heard this very clearly. Someone was reciting Quran, they recite the ayat of sajda. It will be essential upon us to perform a sajda. But the ruling is, we cannot do that in salah. We cannot have the intention that when I fulfill the sajda of my salah, or when I go into ruku, or I will make a separate sajda for that particular ayat of sajda that I have heard from the individual who was close to me and he was reciting Quran. So when a person is in salah, when the imam recites or an individual is performing salah alone and he recites an ayat of sajda, the imam recites an ayat of sajda, then they will have to make sajda of tilaawah. Not when we are performing salah, someone is next to us reciting Quran and we hear this ayat of sajda, we will have to make the sajda. We will have to make the sajda because we heard it. And this is when it becomes wajib. We heard the ayat of sajda, along with the person who recited it, it became wajib upon him. We heard it also. When do we have to do the sajda? After we have performed the salah. A person was sitting in one place and reciting the same verse of sajda several times. Only one sajda will be wajib. He could either recite that verse as many times as he wishes and then make one sajda right at the end. Or he could recite that verse once, make one sajda, and then recite that verse as many times as he wishes. But if he changes his place and then repeats that verse, then goes to a third place and recites that same verse, and in the same way continues changing places, and he continues reciting that same verse, then for every time he repeats that verse, he will have to make a sajda for that. What is being described here, my dear respected brothers and sisters, we are coming up to what is called a change of majlis. And that comes up many a times in the books of fiqh, many a times for discussions of the laws of the Sharia. Divorce, sajda of tilawat, different things. So now, trade, differences of majlis. So a majlis is considered that we are sitting here, this is one majlis. I am sitting here, this is one majlis, one sitting, one gathering, right? In one sitting. So the ruling here is that I am reciting Tilaawah of Quran, Sajda of Quran. Sorry, I am reciting a ayat of Sajda. I am sitting in one place. When I move from this place and go to another place, that is a change of majlis. That is a change of majlis, because I have changed my sitting. Jalasa yajlisu means to sit. So a majlis is a place of sitting. So I go to another place, I change my place of sitting. So I am reciting Surah Iqra. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. And I am sitting here. Then I come to the ayat of sajda. I am sitting here and I keep repeating that same ayat of sajda. Because I am in the same majlis, I will only have to make one sajda. And that will suffice for the multiple times I have recited that one ayah of sajda, because my majlis and my place of sitting is the same. How do I perform the ayat of sajda? I could either, one, immediately perform sajda. Allahu Akbar, whilst I am sitting, go down, facing the Qibla again. We mentioned in the previous session, we have to fulfill all the shara'it of salah, facing the Qibla, purity, and covering the awra, and so on. So now, Allahu Akbar, I go down for that first sajda, come back up, continue reciting this because I am rehearsing it. I am trying to memorize this properly and get the ayats in order. So I am reciting it and I am repeating it and repeating it. Because it is the same sajda, this ayat of sajda, this one sajda will suffice. This one sajda will suffice for the multiple times I am reciting this very same sajda. Or I can sit, repeat the sajdas over and over, and then in the end make one sajda which will suffice for the numerous ayat of sajda that I have recited with regards to that same ayat. If, however, I recite that surah here in the masjid, then I go outside, refresh my memory again about the surah. When I reach in the vehicle, refresh my memory again about that surah. And it is different places that I am reciting the same ayat of sajda. Now, because the majlis has changed, I will have to make more than one sajda. If a person sits in one place and recites verses of sajda, several verses of sajda, he will have to make sajda of tilawah for every ayat of sajda, every verse of sajda that we have recited. If a person sitting in one place, the majlis is the same, but we are not speaking about anymore the same ayat of sajda. I am reciting one ayat of sajda, then I recite another, then I recite another, then I recite another, then I recite another. 5 ayats of sajda I have recited in one sitting. Because it is multiple ayats of sajda, different ayats of sajdas, I will have to make that amount that I have recited. Because it is several verses of sajda, it's not the same verse anymore, as opposed to the previous ruling. While sitting down, a person recited a verse of sajda. He then stood up, but did not move from that place of sitting. That is, he stood on the same spot where he had been sitting. He then repeated that same verse. He will only have to make one sajda of tilawat. So, again, reciting Surah Al-Iqra, I am sitting, I recite the ayat of sajda, but I want to stand and do the sajda from the standing position. Allahu Akbar, go down. Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. Allahu Akbar. If I come back in the sitting position, or I stand and come back in the sitting position, and then I continue now reciting more ayats of sajda, then I will still only have to make one sajda of tilawat, because though the positions changed, the majlis where I am remains the same. The majlis where I am remains the same. A person recited a verse of sajda at one place, got up, went to do some work, came back and sat in the same spot and recited that same verse again. He will have to make 2 sajdas. This masla makes it abundantly clear with regards to the changing of majlises, the changes of the place of sitting. I am here, again reciting, rehearsing Surah Iqra, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. And until the end, another surah which has an ayat of sajda, I am reciting it. I sit here, recite it once, twice, I make one sajda, alhamdulillah. Now I leave, I go to the back, go to the washroom, go outside, recite another ayat, then I come back in here. I come back to the place of my desk because the Quran is in that place. I will now have to recite it. I will now have to do another sajda because my place of my majlis has changed. It is the same ayat of sajda that I am reciting. And as opposed to the previous instances whereby my majlis was the same, so although I recited it more than once, I could have made one sajda to fulfill the requirement of reciting the same ayat of sajda several times. Now I have moved from this place. I went outside, went to the front, went to the back, went to the side, and then came back to look at the Quran again, recite Surah Iqra with the ayat of sajda. I will have to make another sajda now because my majlis has changed. If a person recites the same verse of sajda several times in one salah, then he will only have to make one sajda. If he wishes, he could recite it for as many times he wishes and then make one sajda, or he could recite it once, make one sajda, and then recite it as many times he wishes. in that same rakat or even in the next rakat. What is being said here, a person is performing nafil salah and they so desire to keep repeating the ayat of sajda. Then how many sajdas would be required upon them? One. Nafil salah, for example, person performing salah by themselves, reciting the ayat of sajda, and he keeps repeating it. He has to make only one sajda. Though he recited that verse of sajda, the same verse of sajda, several times. A person recited the verse of sajda, but did not make Sajdatut Tilawat. He did not go down in sajda and fulfill that tilawah of recitation. Then he stood up at that very spot, commenced offering salah, and recited that very verse in his salah, and also made sajda of tilawah in his salah. The sajda which he made will be sufficient for both the recitations. However, if he changed his place, it would be wajib to make two sajdas. So again, a person is reciting ayat of sajda. I am trying to memorize this surah, Surah to Iqra. I am sitting in one place, opening the Quran, reciting it, closing the Quran, reciting it. I stand now, facing the direction of the Qibla with all the conditions being fulfilled. Allahu Akbar. I recite Quran, recite this surah, recite the ayat of sajda in this surah. I have recited this ayat more than once, but one sajda that I make in salah will be sufficient for both recitations, because as is mentioned here, a person remains in the same majlis. A person remains in the same majlis. If I change my majlis, then I will have to make more sajdas. If I leave this place and go to another place and start to perform salah and recite that same ayat of sajda, now it will be two sajdas I have to make because I have changed the place. A person sat and he was reciting Quran, he recited an ayat of sajda and he made sajda. Thereafter, he stood up and commenced with salah. And he recited that very said ayat he recited when he was out of salah. Now, he will have to make the sajda again in salah. Right? A person performing salah, sitting, reciting the Quran, memorizing this ayat, or memorizing the surah, made the sajda of tilawat on account of reciting an ayat that necessitates the sajda of tilawah. Then now the person stood up and recited that same ayat of sajda in salah. The person will now have to make another sajda in the salah. And this ayat of sajda, that the sajda to tilawat that he has performed before will not suffice for the one that he is reciting in his salah. Now we go on to the listener. We were speaking all the time about the person reciting. Now with regards to the one who is listening, what about if his place changes? The person who was reciting did not change his place. I am sitting in one place, reciting the Quran, reciting ayats of sajda. And he recited the same verse of sajda several times, same example, reciting Surah to Iqra, trying to keep reading it, and trying to close the book and memorize it. I recited it several times. But there was a person who was listening. He sat and listened in one place. He heard the verse in one place for the first time. And then he went to another place, he heard it, and then another part of the room, another place, and he heard it. The person who is reciting, only one sajda of tilawah will be necessary, but the person who was listening will have to make a sajda for every time they hear the ayat of sajda, because they have moved from one place to another. They have moved from one place to another. So although it is the same ayat of sajda, but they have moved from one place to another, so they will have to repeat the Sajdatut tilawat for the amount of times they moved and heard the ayat of sajda. If the place of the person who was listening did not change, but the place of the person who was reciting changed, then several sajdas become wajib on the person who was reciting, while the person who was listening will have to make only one sajda. The person who was sitting, he sat there and was listening to the ayats of the Quran being recited. And the person who he was listening to was revising that particular surah that has an ayat of sajda in it, or he was reciting a few ayats, and he kept repeating that same ayat of sajda. But the thing about it is, the person who was listening sat in the same place. The person who was reciting the ayats of sajda, he was moving from pillar to post, moving from here, moving there. But he was reciting so loudly that the individual who sat in the same place, he heard him several times reciting the same ayat of sajda. The one who is sitting and listened to the same ayat of sajda being repeated many times, several times, only one sajda of recitation will become essential upon him. But the one who was moving, he will have to make sajdas for the different places that he had gone. It is makruh to recite the entire surah and leave off the verse of sajda. That verse should not be left out merely to save oneself from making sajda. In doing so, it will be regarded as if a person is rejecting that verse. There are different maslas that are mentioned, even with regards to the performance of salah, that in no way a person should show that they are giving preference to a surah over another surah in Kitabus Salah, because all the surahs of the Quran, mashallah, they are the words of Allah, 114 surahs. Yes, some of them, they are special merits. Some of them, the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he has recited certain surahs in certain salawat. Surah Sabbih Isma Rabbikal A'la and Surah Hal Ataka Hadith Al-Ghashiyah in Eid Salah, Jum'ah Salah. Doesn't mean he didn't recite others, but he recited these ones especially in Jum'ah and Eid Salah. Now, a person, it is mentioned, a person cannot specify. A person cannot specify, I can only perform my Jum'ah Salah with Surah Sabbih Isma Rabbikal A'la and Surah Al-A'la and Surah Al-Ghashiyah. And I cannot recite any other surah other than that. That type of intention is not good. Why? It seems that a person is looking with disdain other ayats, other chapters of the Quran. And that's not permissible. Likewise, what is being said here, we don't recite an ayats of the Quran, and just when we are going to recite the sajda of tilawah, we leave it off. Especially when it is in between. And we leave off that, skip that ayat and go to another ayat. It is makruh to do so, a person should not read the entire surah and leave off the verse of sajda, so that they do not have to make the ayat of sajda, the Sajdatut Tilaawah. In doing so, it will be regarded as if the person is rejecting that verse, and of course that is with regards to intention. And you know, the fact of the matter is that a person should not make it a habit that they do something like that. It's one thing that I recite Surah Al-Iqra, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Iqra bismi rabbikal ladhi khalaq, khalaqal insana min alaq, Iqra wa rabbukal akram, alladhi 'allama bil qalam. And then I say Allahu Akbar and I go into sajda. I go into ruku, sorry. I am performing salah, I recite enough ayats of the Quran, and then I go Allahu Akbar. There's no harm. There's no harm in that. Although it is an surah wherein now there's an ayat of sajda. But if I go down to the end, I've recited the entire thing except that ayat of sajda, then that seems to be that I am actually intentionally leaving off that. Why? Because I don't want to make an ayat, a sajda of tilawat, and that is not a good thing. And that is what is being mentioned here, that should be abstained from. There is no harm, on the contrary, in reciting the verse of sajda alone and leaving off the entire surah. If this is done in salah, then an additional condition is that one verse must be such that it equals 3 short verses. However, it is better to recite a few verses together with the verse of sajda. It is better to recite a few verses together with the verses of sajda. So what is being said here, a person in their salah, they recite an ayat of sajda alone. First rakat, an ayat of sajda alone. Then Allahu Akbar, go down and come back. There is no problem with that, as long as that ayat of sajda suffices for the amount of qiraat that is essential to be recited. So they should recite that amount that is necessary. If it is less, then they need to recite more, and that is what is being mentioned here. But Maulana Shafari Tanvi rahmatullahi alayhi, in his book Bahishti Ziwar, is mentioning that it is better to recite a few verses together with the verse of sajda. If a person hears an imam reciting a verse of sajda, and then he joins the congregation thereafter, he should make the sajda of tilawat with the imam. If a person hears an imam reciting a verse of sajda and he joins the congregation thereafter, he should make the sajda of tilawat with the imam. But if the imam has already made the sajda, there are 2 conditions for this. One, if he gets that rakat in which he heard the imam reciting the verse, he will not have to make a sajda. By getting that rakat, it would be regarded as he got the sajda as well. The second scenario, he did not get the rakah. After completing his salah, it will be wajib upon him to make the sajda out of salah. 2 things are being mentioned here. One, we are going towards the salah. Let's take, for example, the Imam of Fajr on Yawmul Jum'ah is reciting Surah Alif Lam Mim Sajda, Surah Sajda, in the first rakat, and Surah Dahar in the second rakat. This is also a sunnah of the Nabi alayhi salatu wassalam. Now, the Imam reached the ayat of sajda, but the person was performing their 2 sunnah, and coming after they fulfill their 2 sunnah, went straight to join the congregation, and they were not in the salah when the imam recited the ayat of sajda, but they joined him immediately after. They have to go down in sajda with the imam. But if they did not go down in sajda with the imam, the imam comes back up from that rakat, but they get that from that sajda, sorry. And before the Imam says Allahu Akbar to go down in ruku for the first rakat of that salah, the follower finds him in that ruku. And then he completes the 2 rakats with the Imam. He will now not have to make an ayat of sajda, because because he found that rakah with the Imam, it will be regarded as he has obtained the sajda, because he found that rakah with the Imam, though he did not fulfill the sajda, then that sajda will be considered accomplished. It's just like, you know, if a person was not there when the Imam was reciting Surah Al-Fatiha or the other surah, and as a matter of fact, when the Imam went from Qiyam to Ruku, they were not there. But when they say Allahu Akbar and they join the Imam in Ruku, they don't have to they find the Imam in Ruku, coming back up, they found that rakah, though they were not there for the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha by the Imam or another surah afterwards. It will be like they have gotten the entire rakah. So the first instance is that a person, it will be deemed that he has accomplished the ayat of the sajda of Tilaawah, because he got the rakah with the Imam, that very said rakah that the Imam went down for sajda, ayat of sajda, the Sajdatut Tilaawah, although the Muqtadi himself did not fulfill that sajda with the Imam, but he got that rakah, the first rakah with the Imam, and the Imam did the ayat of the sajda of Tilaawah before that. So he got that same rakat with the Imam, it will be considered that he has fulfilled that sajda. He got that sajda. The second scenario, he didn't get that rakat. He heard the Imam reciting the ayat of sajda, and he was coming from his place of performing his 2 sunnah. The same scenario. He's performing his 2 sunnah, and then he is going to join the Imam when the Imam is reciting Surah Sajda in the first rakat of the Fajr prayer, which is not essential, we are just by way of example. And he did not find the Imam in ruku. When the Imam was going into Sajda of the Salah, then he found the Imam. Now, he has to make up 1 rakat. And what about this Sajda? What is being mentioned here? After the completion of his Salah, it will be wajib on him to make the Sajda out of Salah. Just as anybody else, someone is performing Salah, they are like Ramadan is coming, inshallah, Huffaz, they are preparing for their Taraweeh, and now they are reciting Quran. Probably they are reciting loudly, and someone hears this ayat of sajda being recited by them. They will have to do the Sajdatut Tilaawah as well as the one who is reciting the Quran. So this individual, he heard the Imam reciting Quran, ayat of sajda. The Imam made his ayat of sajda for the first rakat of the Fajr Salah, but he missed it with the Imam, and he has to make up for his first rakat also after the Imam gives his salam, because he's a masbook, and we spoke about the masbook. But when he finishes his salah, it will also now be essential upon him to make the sajda of tilawat outside his salah, to make a sajda of tilawat outside of salah. By laughing aloud in sajda of tilawah, one's wudu does not break. However, the sajdatut tilawah itself becomes invalid. Loud laughter. What is loud laughter? We hear ourselves, and the person who is next to us can hear us laugh. Whilst we are performing the sajda of tilawah, we laugh loudly. this would cause this sajda of tilawah to become invalid. We have to do it over. But it will not cause our wudu to become broken. It will not cause our wudu to become broken. And the reason why it mentions this, it will not cause our wudu to become broken, the opposite is that of performance of normal salah. If we laugh loudly, whereby the person who is next to us can hear us in salah, then our salah becomes broken and our wudu becomes broken. Loud laughter in salah according to the Hanafi jurists. But in sajda of tilawat, it would not break our wudu, it would break and cause to become invalid the sajda of tilawah. So therefore we will have to start over, whether in the sitting position or the standing position, say Allahu Akbar and go down for the sajda of tilawah again. When sajda of tilawah becomes wajib in salah, it is wajib to make that salah immediately. It is not permissible to delay it. When sajda of tilawah is recited in salah, it is essential to perform it immediately. And that is why it is mentioned, either one or two ayats, short ayats after that, then go down. Right? But immediately a person should recite go down in sajda of tilawat. What has been mentioned before, if after one or two ayats a person goes in ruku, then it will be fulfilled with the intention of sajdatut tilawat. But generally speaking, when a person is reciting Quran in salah, they come to an ayat of sajda, they should immediately go down, then come back up. The verses of sajda should not be recited in the Friday prayer, Jum'ah Salah, Eid Salah, and in those Salah which are offered silently, because the muqtadis may be put into doubt. On the day of Jum'ah, on the day of Eid especially, many people come for the Eid Salah who have probably don't perform Salah, and they are not accustomed to performing Salah. Not talking about whether that is sinful or whatever have you. Speaking about, it is mentioned that when we are performing Salatul Jum'ah, big gathering, large gathering, Eid Salah, and those Salah which are offered silently, it is best that we do not recite the ayat of sajda. Because if we recite the ayat of sajda, we may go down in sajda and people may not know what is going on. They will become confused. And sometimes it could cause people's salah to become broken. A man will say, what is wrong with this imam? He doesn't even know how to perform salah. I am in a better position than him. I don't perform salah throughout the year. I only come for one Eid salah. But I know before you go for sajda, there is ruku. But he doesn't know that the imam is making sajdatut tilawat. He is not making the sajda of his salah. So therefore, this is why it is mentioned that it is best in the Jum'ah salah, Eid salah, and those salah that are offered silently, a person should not make the sajda of tilawah. Because even a person who is coming in late for the salah, imagine a silent salah, and a person is making his wudu, he is coming inside, he sees the imam going down in sajda, Allahu Akbar, he goes down. And he thought, well, that was one rakat, and he mixes up the number of rakats that he has to perform, because he's checking this as one rakat, right? So, and he made a mistake with regards to how much he actually got. It could cause the situation to become confusing, so therefore that is why it is mentioned, and it is advised that for the Jum'ah Salah, Eid Salah, and Salah which are offered silently, there should be no recitation of verses of sajda, so that they would not have to go into, the imam would not have to go in sajda, and thereby causing people to become confused, etc. We will stop there with the topic of Sajdatut Tilaawah, and we will continue inshallah. Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.